Hope you guys can come on live. Looking forward to having some interaction this morning. Just me again this morning. I want to talk with you about a few things that have just caught my attention over the last few days, things that are relevant to everyone who might be listening, whether you're interested in MS, Alzheimer's, migraine, epilepsy, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and so forth. I'm going to touch on some different topics, things that are in the news, things that are of interest, big questions, major findings from week to week, and look forward again to hearing back from you about what catches your interest and what you'd like to hear more about. So this week I get a weekly kind of a magazine tabloid. It's called Neurology Reviews, and it updates me on some of the really interesting things going on in neurology. There were a few things in here that were very interesting that I'd like to share with you, and I have a couple other things as well to tell you about. First of all, I want to send congratulations out to my research team. We do several clinical trial studies here at Charlotte Health and Neurology and Charlotte Health Neuroscience Research Center. We got a newsletter from Novartis Corporation, issue 4, dated December 2020, and I don't know if you can see here, highlighted my name. We actually, and this is worldwide, folks, worldwide, Charlotte Health and Neurology, Charlotte Health Neuroscience Research Center was extended a huge thank you from Novartis Corporation for participating in a study called Lithios, which I'll explain in a moment. We're the second highest enroller in the world. In the world, folks, right here in Ozark, Missouri. So we're very proud to help further an understanding of research in multiple sclerosis. If you are looking for a cutting-edge clinic with many options, many solutions, you couldn't find a better place to seek out your neurology care. Well, Lithios is a really important study, and it brings to light something that I think a lot of folks have on their mind. So I'm going to back up just a bit. We are talking about medication treatment, and I know you guys want to know a lot about the more holistic side of things, but the reality is that some folks really, really need the medication to keep things stable. Ultimately, we are talking about function. We are talking about maximizing the quality of your life, and everyone is unique and different, and some people need medication and some people don't, and we certainly work very hard to help those who do need medication limit the amount of medication that they need to use the lowest possible dose for the shortest period of time. That being said, in multiple sclerosis, there are what are called disease-modifying therapies. These medications have a variety of mechanisms of action, a variety of potencies or degrees of effectiveness, depending on what you're measuring, relapse rate, what we call disability progression over time, changes on the MRI. All of those are important measures when it comes to multiple sclerosis. There are a lot of treatments, and if I could just go off on a tangent for a moment, it's very distressing to me when I meet new MS patients in my office who say they've come from another neurologist who have handed them pamphlets for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different drugs and said, you pick. Look, we want everyone to play a role in their own health care, but these are very complicated decisions. These are drugs with complex mechanisms of action, and we really expect more out of our neurologists than say, here are 5 or 6 pamphlets and you pick. So we don't do that here at Charlotte Health and Neurology. It's definitely not my style. I might say this is my main recommendation, but if for any reason you're looking for an alternative to consider, this would be my second choice. And it's really rare that I suggest more than 1 or 2 options if I do think that someone needs medication. So one of the areas of disease-modifying therapy in multiple sclerosis that has been of tremendous interest lately is the role that a certain type of immune cell called B cells play in triggering this disease. Now, there are different types of immune cells. Some are called T cells, some are called B cells, there are others, and even within those two broad categories there are subpopulations of T cells and B cells. But very, very generally speaking, those B cells are the ones that produce antibodies. So when you think about immunity, or even autoimmunity, like when you're in MS, which is considered an autoimmune disease for the most part, where the nerve cells and the conductive coating over the nerve cells are being attacked. Part of the reason they're being attacked is that these B cells are producing antibodies that participate in the immune response. And so the idea in general is that if you block the activity of these antibody-producing immune cells, will that slow the progression of the disease? These immune cells also call into play the so-called T cells that provide what are called cellular immunity, and they have a different mechanism of action of coming into that area of inflammation and attacking. Now, of course, we don't want to attack ourselves. We want to have an immune system that protects us against things that are foreign or threats to our health. And the whole idea of autoimmunity is that that's not actually what's happening, where instead what's happening is that the immune system is attacking our own body, or specifically the brain and the spinal cord. So at any rate, this new generation of medications that we're seeing really goes back to one called rituximab that in fact is not approved in the US for treatment of multiple sclerosis, but it is used quite widely worldwide, and there are some people in the US, I'm sure, who are using rituximab. And then we had Ocrelizumab, which is a very slight variation. It goes under the trade name Ocrevus. Most recently, we have ofatumumab, or Kesimpta, and that is the medication being used in the Alithio's trial I spoke about a moment ago. I read in a recent report that there is yet another one on the way that has a very similar mechanism of action, and we're starting a whole new trial with Sanofi Genzyme looking at what is called a Bruton's tyrosine kinase inhibitor that essentially, while it has a slightly different mechanism of action, the downstream effect is to block the activity of these B cells. Well, I'm going on and on about this, but why is this really important in the broad scheme of things? Well, here we are in the COVID pandemic, and we've just gotten the news in the last week that, the United States Food and Drug Administration has approved the emergency use of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and we expect an announcement any day now for the Moderna vaccine. And for many Americans, that's extremely welcome news. I know that some of you may be sort of anti-vaccine, and that's really a whole separate discussion. But, we have lost 300,000 Americans, and by the time this is over, who knows, that number may actually double. So the news of the vaccine is, for the most part, very, very welcome. Well, I've been talking about a drug that blocks the B cell's ability to produce antibodies that would attack the nerves in the brain. So when you get a vaccine, even if it's a non-live vaccine, meaning it doesn't actually contain a live version of the virus that would otherwise make you sick, the idea is that you create antibodies in response to the vaccine and therefore don't get coronavirus, right? So then what happens when you block these B cells, or a specific population of B cells? Is it going to interfere with your ability to produce an immune response to the vaccine? Well, that's a really, really, really important question, and that's what Alithio's is trying to determine, specifically with respect to Kesimpta or ofatumumab. But we do have some additional information about Ocrelizumab, or Ocrevus, which is almost exactly identical to ofatumumab. It has a slightly different administration route, where Ocrevus is intravenous and it's given once every 6 months. But these antibodies the drug is actually an antibody itself, are almost exactly identical and have the same mechanism of action. So I have an article here. It came out in the journal Neurology just this past October 6, 2020. Very recent, very important study, the effect of Ocrelizumab on vaccine responses in patients with multiple sclerosis. And this was what they call a phase 3B study. Of course, the drug is already FDA approved to assess the responses to selected vaccines in Ocrelizumab treated patients with multiple sclerosis. Now, this study did not include the coronavirus vaccine. Of course, they did look at tetanus toxoid, the Pneumovax 23-valent pneumococcal polysaccharide, or PPV, vaccine, the KLH, or keyhole limpet hemocyanin vaccine as well. And this is virtually identical to what we're doing with the ofatumumab study. We're also looking at the influenza vaccine. So what did they actually find? So in the results of this study, positive response to the tetanus toxoid vaccine at 8 weeks was 23.9% in the Ocrelizumab group versus 54.5% in the control group. So a group of individuals who had gotten a placebo or had not actually received Ocrelizumab, so they could compare the general population response to those who had been treated with this B-cell blocking drug. Positive response of greater than 5 serotypes in the 23 PPV at 4 weeks was 71.6% in the Ocrelizumab group and 100% in the control group. Prevnar did not enhance response to pneumococcal serotypes in common with Pneumovax. Humoral response to KLH was decreased in the Ocrelizumab versus control group. Seroprotection rates at 4 weeks against 5 influenza strains range from 55.6% to 80% in the Ocrelizumab group, 75 to 97% in the control group. So what are we hearing in general is that when you get treated with this B-cell inhibiting drug, Ocrelizumab, it does definitely reduce your ability to mount a full immune response. But you do mount a response. And so it was the final recommendation and findings of this study group that while the Ocrelizumab treatment remained important and a consideration for the treatment of multiple sclerosis, and while the consideration of humoral immunity needs to be factored in when choosing the drug, nevertheless, it was recommended to vaccinate patients on Ocrelizumab because a potentially protective humoral response, even if somewhat less, could be expected. So, in other words, if this drug is right for you as an individual, you should go ahead, have the medication if that's what you and your doctor decide together, and at the same time know that you can be vaccinated and you will at least have a partial immune response to that vaccination. And we know that those partial responses can be effective in either preventing the disease altogether or limiting the severity of the disease. So we can potentially, we don't know for sure, but potentially extrapolate to the coronavirus vaccine and say, hey, if you're on one of these medications, or if you are considering one of these medications and you feel that it is the best choice for you, to go ahead and use that medication and know that you can still be vaccinated for coronavirus, that your response may not be 100%. In fact, I would say it's likely not going to be 100%, but I would say based on the available evidence, it's probable that you will have some degree of protection against coronavirus illness. So that's helpful news. I get a lot of those questions from my patients, and I wanted to share that with you. Along the same lines with multiple sclerosis, in the Neurology Reviews, there was a very, very interesting article related to a presentation at the recent joint European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis / American Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis. These are collectively known as ECTRIMS and ACTRIMS, and this year, rather than compared to prior years, this year those two meetings were combined into one single meeting, and it was done virtually. It was called MS Virtual 2020. So this is, some of the most important meetings of the scientists and clinicians that occur every year to talk about advancements in our understanding of multiple sclerosis. And one of many studies that was reported at this meeting was one that looked at women who have MS and are pregnant. Now, of course, this is super important along many lines. Pregnancy is a wonderful time for so many folks thinking about having a family, but multiple sclerosis, adds a very complex consideration into the pregnancy situation. But historically, what we've always thought about pregnancy and MS is that women who are pregnant, at least during the period of time of pregnancy, that pregnancy seems to have a protective effect against exacerbations or flare-ups of multiple sclerosis, where in contrast, the postpartum period immediately after the baby is born is most commonly associated with an increased likelihood of flare-ups. Now, you can't be pregnant all the time, but there have been studies that looked at what is it about pregnancy that seems to be protective. Well, this study that came out of the ECTRIMS or MS 2020 virtual meeting is really, I thought it was incredibly important because what these researchers actually found is that even though clinical exacerbations may be less common during pregnancy, that actually subclinical disease, and I'll explain what that means, is increased. Completely the opposite of what we've typically thought, that subclinical disease is actually increased during pregnancy, which perhaps may explain in part why immediately postpartum we have that high-risk window for flare-ups. Now, what they've done is they've looked at a very kind of hot, if you will, hot topic biomarker called serum neurofilament light chain. What that is basically it's part of nerve cells, and when nerve cells are damaged, this stuff spills out into the bloodstream, it spills out into the spinal fluid, and so it's being looked at not just in MS, but in areas like, for example, Alzheimer's disease, other neurodegenerative disorders, traumatic brain injury, where we can use it as a measure of severity or response to treatment. Most of that is still in the arena of research. It's not something that your general neurologist can just simply go out and order. But what we know is at least that there are definite changes in the levels of the serum neurofilament light chain during pregnancy that suggest increased nerve cell damage during pregnancy. Increased, the complete opposite of what we would typically expect to be occurring based on what clinically appears to be happening, that is, fewer flare-ups of multiple sclerosis. So what does this really mean for women who are considering pregnancy who have MS? Well, to me, it means one of two things that are not necessarily mutually exclusive. First of all, it means that you're not out of the woods if you're pregnant. Of course, we always need to keep the health of the mother and the baby in mind at all times, and using those prenatal vitamins and for those interested in functional medicine, taking an even deeper dive into looking at what are the factors that could put the mother and the baby at risk, and really dialing them in both in the pregnancy planning period or the pre-pregnancy period, as well as during and postpartum. That almost goes without saying, right? We have to take care of our brains and bodies and be as resilient as possible throughout our entire lives, but especially during that period around pregnancy. That also means that even though it appears that clinically exacerbations are fewer, we don't want to get too cavalier and say that if you're in a situation where medication is appropriate for you, we should just go ahead and stop the medication because pregnancy itself is protective. I think it means quite the opposite. I think it means double down. I think it means having the information that you need to decide what medication is right for you and what medicines we know are the safest during pregnancy. This can be things like some of the interferon medications, Copaxone, perhaps, teriflunomide or Aubagio. So at any rate, these are, of course, individual discussions to have with your neurologist. But realize that even though pregnancy itself is quite a serious matter, and we take care of ourselves and the baby, at the same time taking care of ourselves and the baby may mean actually continuing the medication during pregnancy, because the disease itself does continue, and in fact, on a certain level, may actually be worse during pregnancy rather than better. So there you have it, some interesting news in the world of MS. I did pick out a couple of other things to quickly touch on. There's a very nice little study that used some data from a new migraine medication. And this, what I want to chat with you about here, has nothing to do with medication per se. The headline here is HIT6 may help track meaningful change in chronic migraine. HIT6 means Headache Impact Test. HIT6, and it's a way to track outcomes. Whether you're talking about functional medicine or whether you're talking about traditional neurology medicine, in the end, getting the outcomes that you want needs to include tracking. This isn't magic wand stuff, and too often I see folks who just want to try different supplements and see what happens, but we're really all about tracking here at Charlotte Health and Neurology. This means collecting objective, measurable information so that you get the outcomes that you want. All right, we use the Montreal Cognitive Assessment when we're tracking Alzheimer's disease. We use what's called a peg hold test, 25-foot walk, when we're tracking multiple sclerosis. So here is a meaningful tracking tool for migraine. And I just want to say that if your doctor isn't tracking your outcomes, they are not doing their job, right? We can't know if we're getting benefit by just guessing. We absolutely have to measure. So it applies to traditional neurology, and it applies to conventional functional medicine rather as well. Another really interesting headline: over-the-counter brain boosters may pose serious risks, experts say. So this has been kind of a peeve of mine. I'm very about taking natural approaches. I'm very about understanding why we get sick and helping people get better. But I am very against some of these supplement products that sneak in compounds that are actually drugs, and folks don't really know what they're taking. And I know you want to do your own research, but there's a reason we have PhD pharmacologists and researchers, and there's a reason we go to medical school and have years and years of experience working with things. I've been particularly critical of I'm going to put this in quotation marks, sleep aid that's often snuck into some of these over-the-counter natural sleeping pills, so-called natural sleeping pills. It's called phenibut. It is actually a drug, folks. It is a drug. And phenibut has the same mechanism of action as Valium. It is highly addictive. It can cause terrible withdrawal symptoms. It can flare anxiety, potentially even seizures. It is considered a drug in places like Russia, but in the United States, somehow it's snuck in to our market as if it's a food, not a drug. There are also nootropics like aniracetam, vinpocetine, I don't know how to pronounce this one, picamylon, Picamilon. These are basically compounds that some people think make you smarter, smart pills, if you will. Really, folks, drink a cup of coffee, hey. But we need to take care of our brains in so many ways. And if we could just go about our business and continue doing what we're doing and just take pills to make us smarter, that would be just great. But the reality is it doesn't really work that way. This group, this was a study published September 23rd in Neurology Clinical Practice. This group looked at 10 products. I found 5 unapproved drugs discovered in these products, ombaracetam and aniracetam, along with 3 others, phenibut, vinpocetine, and picamylon. Several drugs detected in these smart pills were not declared on the label. Several declared drugs were not detected in the products. So it's either the stuff thrown in that they're not telling you is there, or stuff they're telling you is there that's not really actually there or not there in the doses they're telling you there. Consumers who use these cognitive enhancers could be exposed to amounts of these unapproved drugs that are 4-fold greater than the pharmaceutical dosages and combinations never tested in humans. One product combined 3 different unapproved drugs, and another product contained 4 different drugs. So enough said about that, folks. That sounds like a very bad idea. Hey, if you need help with your brain, come see me. Let's talk. I really want to help you. But go into your natural food store and buying a bottle of capsules off the counter that purports to enhance your memory could be a very dangerous thing. Last couple things real quick because I want to wrap it up by 30 minutes. Diabetic neuropathic pain linked to brain bioenergetic abnormalities. How fascinating is this? Diabetic neuropathy is a very painful cause of neuropathy, or a very painful form of neuropathy, and really think of what's going on at the level of the nerve endings that are driving the pain. But it turns out that changes in mitochondrial activity in pain processing areas of the brain may help explain why some people with diabetes experience painful neuropathy. Guess what? This is a multi-system disorder. And when you have diabetes, it affects every part of the body. Remember that Alzheimer's disease is sometimes called diabetes type 3. And if you're taking a pill that makes your blood sugar look better, you still have diabetes. So come talk to me. Let's cure this diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a completely preventable and reversible disorder. And if your doctor is telling you you just need to take the pill and can continue on the same trajectory you've been on, they are dead wrong. Okay, last one. This is a great functional medicine topic. Bacteria may be associated with the risk of multiple sclerosis relapse. Now, this is why this topic is not super new to the functional medicine crowd and the research crowd, meaning that we know with a variety of diseases that there appear to be alterations in the balance of the microbiome or the bacteria that live in the gut where there are certain patterns that are more common with people who have these diseases, whether you're talking about Alzheimer's, ALS, migraine, multiple sclerosis. Unfortunately, there doesn't appear to be a lot of consistency as to which bacteria play a major role. You can find one paper that has one finding, another paper that's another finding. What do you do with that information? Do you treat somebody with an antibiotic to treat their multiple sclerosis? These are big unknowns. But what I thought was super interesting about this paper, it may solve some of the disparities between the variety of studies that have been published, at least point in an interesting direction, is that this study, this was pediatric onset multiple sclerosis. It suggested that yes, there were differences in specific bacteria, but the common thread was what they call the methanogenesis pathway. So we know that, basically, folks, we're talking about farting, okay? But we know that some bacteria are methane producers, and more than others. We see this, especially when we test for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and we look at methane producers. But it turns out to be the case in the large intestine as well. If you've sat next to somebody who's had a few too many beans and they don't digest them well. But humor aside, here may be a way that we can understand these disparities in the different bacteria. It may not actually be the specific bacteria so much as what they have in common. And we have to understand this methane or methanogenesis pathway to understand better why having imbalances in bacteria that tend to be greater methane producers puts a person at greater risk for multiple sclerosis. So that's kind of a forehead scratcher at the moment. I think we have to learn a lot more, but I can say as a clinician, I've been kind of unsatisfied with the fact that we've been able to identify these differences in the guts of people who have multiple sclerosis, because really, ultimately, what do we do with that information? We absolutely need to be making changes to our diet, focusing on an anti-inflammatory diet, whether that's the brain tune-up diet or the Walls protocol, eating pre- and prebiotic foods, emphasizing probiotics, living foods, fermented foods, lots of green leafy vegetables, colors, sulfur vegetables, eating the right kind of protein and the best sources of fat in the diet. All of that is absolutely still the case. And know that food is not the only thing that affects gut bacteria, but all the other lifestyle factors, whether it's stress, whether it's sleep, and whether it's exercise, they all play a role, and we can't really do one without the other and expect good outcomes. But in the meantime, we're certainly not going to be treating folks with antibiotics to treat these shifts in gut bacteria, because we need to learn more. And as you know, antibiotics have as many downsides potentially as benefits. Unless you're treating an acute infection, that can be a huge threat to a person's well-being. And it's a similar question as to why perhaps things like treating SIBO with an antibiotic or having a fecal microbial transplant can be temporarily beneficial, but the problem comes right back. And that's because we're not addressing the whole picture. So all of these strategies are potentially quite valuable, but understanding the big picture, attacking the problem at the root cause level, means that some of these more allopathic disease treatment strategies, we're focusing on the disease treatment strategy rather than the person-centered strategy, can have limited benefits, or can have benefits that are more sustained if we combine that with a person-centered strategy. So that's all I have to share with you guys today. That's 33 minutes and 46 seconds, so a few minutes too long. I apologize, but I hope I've shared with you some interesting stuff. Look forward to seeing you next Wednesday morning.